Shalom, everyone. Welcome to the House of Selah Ministry. We are continuing in the deep reading through the book of Hebrews. This is part 15. The lesson is sponsored by the House of Selah Ministries and presented by Brother Andrew Brett. In part 14, we finished up chapter 8, and we discussed how it was the Levitical priesthood that was replaced and not the covenant. And if you look at your Bible, you'll see that the word covenant is italicized. It was inserted by the translators. Why? Because they want you to think that there's something different going on. But we know that's not the case. Context proves that. We proved this by examining Jeremiah 31, chapter 31, and reading through those verses starting at verse 31. And then we began to read chapter 9, where Paul explains what is actually replaced and what's involved in what was replaced. In other words, chapter 9 provides further context to demonstrate what was actually replaced. All right? Further supporting what we've already discussed, that we're not dealing with anything new, but a renewed covenant, and that we are now under the order of the Melchizedek, or order of Melchizedek, the high priest, Yashar, instead of the high priest of the Levitical order. That's what we've talked about so far. All right? So we're going to continue in chapter 9 in verses 2 through 5. Again, we are with the Levitical priesthood transferred to Yahusha, not changed. The word actually should have been translated to transferred to Yahusha under the order of Melchizedek. Paul discusses the services of Levitical priests. So why, if he talked about a new covenant, why is this conversation about what services the priest and the high priest conducted? You got to think when we read, right? And you got to read all of the letter, not a piece. So let's go ahead and start off. For there was a tabernacle made, excuse me, the first wherein was the candlestick, the menorah, and the table, and the shewbread, which is called the sanctuary. That's what all that was, called the sanctuary. And after the second veil, the tabernacle, which is called the holiest of all, which had the golden censer, and the ark of the covenant overlaid round about with gold, wherein was the golden pot that had manna, and Aaron's rod that budded, and the tables of the covenant, the 10 Commandments, by the way, which are still, the church still says is relevant today, but they say there's no covenant. So why would the tables of the covenant still be relevant today without a covenant? Doesn't make sense, does it? And over it, the cherubims of glory shadowing the mercy seat that sits on top of the Ark of the Covenant, of which we cannot now speak particularly. So if these details are considered the covenant, think about this, and it is claimed that they have passed away, then why is the same veil spoken of in Hebrews 6:19? The same veil Yahusha enters in heaven still exists. Think about that. And we know that the tabernacle that was built here was a shadow of what is in the Shamayim, or in heaven, because we said already that this was a shadow of heavenly things, the tabernacle or the priesthood set up, the Levitical priesthood, and so on. So, if the law is going to waive it, why have the same structure in the kingdom that is in heaven? Why have the same law? Why have the same temple structure? The original is there, by the way. This was just a copy. So think about that. Ask those questions. By asking questions like that, you see that this further supports that it's not the first covenant that is no more. Because what we're given, what was given, I'm sorry for the typo, what was given on the earth, what was provided to us on earth was preceded and is present in heaven. We have to know this. We have to understand. And this is stuff we've already talked about because Paul has already mentioned. All right? Everybody follow so far?
Yes.
Go. All right. All right. So with Levitical priesthood transferred to Yahusha, Paul discusses the services of the Levitical priest. Brother, do you mind reading verses 6 through 10 for me?
No problem. Oh, I'm sorry. You should say I'm looking at a different spot. Hebrews 9, verse 6 to 10. Now when these things were thus ordained, the priest went always into the first tabernacle, accomplishing the service of Yahweh. But unto the second went the high priest alone once every year, not without blood, which he offered for himself and for the errors of the people. The Ruach HaKodesh is signifying that the way into the holiest of all was not yet made manifest, while as the first tabernacle was yet standing, which was a figure for the first time then present. Figure for the time then present, my apologies, in which were offered both gifts and sacrifices that could not make him that did the service perfect, as pertaining to the conscience, which stood only in meats and drinks and divers washing, and carnal ordinances imposed on them until the time of Reformation.
All right. Thank you, brother. I like taking my time reading these. You have to we're going to read through it again because there's a lot being said here. And we'll pause and speak on it a little bit as we read, but you need to understand that it takes a little bit. You just can't read this and go on. All right? Now, we just spoke previously, right, on, excuse me, on the actual structure of the temple that the priest worked in, right? And he's continuing discussing the services that the priest conducted. Now, when these things were thus ordained, the temple and the holy place and the holy of holies and all the things that we spoke of that was in place, the priest went always into the first tabernacle. So we know that the holy place, the priests were able to do their services there, accomplishing the service of Yahweh. But in the second, only the high priest went in once a year on the Day of Atonement, and he had to do it with blood, which he did for himself and for the heirs of the people, not the world. This is why the church says the law is done away with, because the law specifically speaks to atonement for Yashar, for the stranger who cleaves to them, not for the whole world. Now you see why the church constantly teaches that this is done away with. But if you see what Paul is speaking of, this very atonement process is in place in the Shamayim by our high priest, Yahusha. All right? Now the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, this signifying that the way in the holiest of holies has not yet been manifested while this first tabernacle was yet standing, which was a figure or an example for that time, all right, for that time then present, in which were offered both gifts and sacrifices that could not make him that did the services perfect. Why? Because there was a constant remaining a conscience to sin. So if there was not, and Paul says this, if there was no conscience, then there will be no further need of sacrifices, nor would have been needed for Mashiach to come if these sacrifices would have done the job. And it says these services, which we've talked about, of blood and others, were in meats and drinks and diverse washing. And this right here is tricky wording by the English. Carnal ordinance. As if the ordinances were of the flesh. So we need to get rid of those. It puts a negative connotation on these two words. But they're poorly translated to misguide. Imposed on them until the time of Reformation. We're going to define these words. Okay? Mm-hmm. So in these verses, we see Paul detailing what the Levitical priest had to do. And once a year, the high priest would enter through the veil to the Holy of Holies. For those who are not the high priest, we did not have a way into the Holy of Holies. We don't have that. Only the high priest does. But our high priest today has access as the high priest, right? He has access to through that veil to the Holy of Holies. And we'll speak to that in the next chapter, specifically Hebrews 10 and 20. So we'll discuss that later in the coming parts. All right, so we're going to discuss the highlighted words, but we're going to fill out a little more, but we're going to discuss these highlighted words coming up on the next slide. Before we do that, is everybody following so far? Because this can be complicated to some. Or is there any questions or adds?
I have a question, Brother Andrew. I want to ask the question if you're going to touch on this before I say anything, so I'm not labeled as Twinkle Toes Lesson Stepper. Would you be talking? Will you be talking about the word perfect, and will you be talking about the word conscience?
No.
Will you be?
Or neither.
Neither. Well, let me tell you why I wanted to highlight this, because it says here in verse 9, this is in the middle of it, that could not make him that did the service perfect as pertaining to the conscience. So when we as Westerners hear that word perfect, it should elicit a certain type of mental response or thought, right? And the first thing that usually with the Western mindset we'll think is, well, no one can be perfect. But that word perfect in English, it's a poor replacement for the Hebrew word that was actually there. So if you look that up, the word perfect, it is the Strong's number is G5048. Okay? And this is not going into the Paleo Hebrew. This is just using the Strong's definition, right? G5048. And it means to complete or to accomplish or to consecrate, which means to make perfect. So the definition of perfect here is not our English definition of perfect. The Hebraic definition of perfect would be to complete the individual. So the service was not able to cause the individual, the people that were doing the gifts and sacrifices, it could not make them complete. It did not wholly consecrate them. So there was something that this service did not bring forth from the individual. Okay, so holding on to that definition, right? Holding on to that definition. And then let's look at the other definition where it talks about the conscious, right? The conscious. That Strong's number is G4893. G4893. So when you look that up in the Strong's, it says co-perception or moral consciousness. Moral consciousness. So what is it saying? If we look at those two definitions, it's saying that the gifts and the sacrifices that were offered could not make him that did the service consecrated enough where they could morally serve the Most High. They couldn't morally, their morals were still lacking something. There was something they did not either understand, comprehend, or it wasn't being carried out in the individual. So Yahushua came to demonstrate what that looks like, and also to give them something that would help them to morally walk upright before the Most High. So that's what that sentence is saying there. And it does say that in this perfection, it actually helps them to become able to minister to the Most High. So there was something that they needed to be able to minister to the Most High and to keep a good moral consciousness about it. So I wanted to highlight that before we move forward. Thank you, Brother Andrew.
No, that's excellent. And to point to support this, what Minister White is saying, in Isaiah, I believe it's the first chapter, Yahuwah says, "What has caused you to tread my courts?
Hmm.
Because I'm sick and tired of the sacrifice of the bulls and goats, because there was no moral conscience to serve Yah. They had no moral or loyalty or morality, a sense of morality. They weren't learning that by staying in Torah. They didn't treat it as a fulfillment of Torah as well. So they would just abuse the atonement that Torah provided. There was no moral sense to that.
It was religious, or should we say
It was.
ceremonial? How about that? Mhm.
That's perfect. Yes, ma'am.
Mhm.
That's very much exactly, 100% exactly what's going on.
Mhm.
Listen to that statement, audience. Listen to what Minister White said. It was a religion, a ritual, the same routine that we see every day in the church. If you do not believe that that the church doesn't have that, go to the churches you grew up around and look at the communities and the condition of the church itself, in and out in the community. You will see no change. Nothing's accomplished. Nothing has been made whole, because the church is a religion, a ceremonial practice. All right? All right, anybody else? All right. So let's dig into these highlighted words. Carnal is an interesting word. It does not mean flesh. And that surprised me. In this definition, the word is speaking to the body or the living body. Think about that. So now it preceded the word ordinance. So it's a description of that word. The word ordinances, which is dikaioma, what has been established and ordained by Torah. So the Torah respecting bodily purity. All right? So it's not a negative connotation. But they could have chosen a much better word. They've used flesh before and body before. But whenever we hear the word carnal, we instantly think negative. And if you grew up in church, you know you cannot be carnal. Carnal thoughts and so on, right? It's a negative word. But the word carnal does not mean what we thought. Normally, you'll see that word translated sarx as flesh. But here it's speaking of the body, as of the person, like man or woman. Now, the word reformation is diorthosis, and it's a making straight, restoring to its natural and normal condition. So, if reformation is the third word in this sequence, then, and this is a positive thing, how is this now considered negative when it's a restoration? All right, so it's an act. It's of acts and institutions, so it's a restoration of things, the perfecting of things, the making things whole. All right. Any questions? We'll move to the next slide and put it together. But any questions before we do that? All right. Let's move to the next slide. So when we restate this, I'll read it from the beginning again because I like these verses here. Now, when these things were thus ordained, the priest went always into the first tabernacle, accomplishing the service of Yah. But into the second went the high priest alone, once every year on the Day of Atonement, not without blood. He had to have blood, right? Which he offered for himself. He offered for himself and for the errors of the people. And the only people that he would have been doing that for was Hebrews. He wasn't the high priest of the Hamites, the Hittites, the Amorites. It was Yashar. The Ruach HaKodesh, this signifying that the way into the holiest of all was not yet made manifest, while as the first tabernacle was yet standing, which was a figure for the time then present. All right, so what the Levitical priesthood and the tabernacle was an example at that time. All right, it was an example of what is to come. Paul says this multiple times in Hebrews, in which were offered both gifts and sacrifices that could not make him that did the service whole, right, perfect, as pertaining to the moral service to Yah, the moral commitment to Yah, which stood only in meats and drinks and diverse washing, and what was established by Torah for the body, the purification, like we just spoke on. All right? Makes sense now, doesn't it? It was speaking to what was in Torah according to your well-being, your physical well-being, and imposed on them until the time of restoring of our natural and normal condition. What is that? This is the restoration of our condition before the fall. That is what's natural and normal. Sin is not natural and normal. Living according to the will of man is not natural and normal. Restoring us to the condition we were before the fall of Adam, is what's normal to Yah. So in other words, we can put it together like this. Levitical priesthood stayed in place, performing the services and ordinances of Torah to atone for sin until Yahusha, under the order of Melchizedek, makes it possible for the restoring of our condition from sin, a condition that was out of the way, all right, as it's called, through his own sacrifice for us and his ministry in the heavenly place. Because he is the minister of this covenant, and he is the mediator of this covenant. So he is active in the service in the Shamayim, in the temple in the Shamayim, because he's the high priest. So the Mashiach is busy on our behalf. All right? How's everybody feeling? You following me? Mm-hmm. Any questions? Or ads?
What I was thinking is asking myself, what was missing? What was missing from this priesthood, the original priesthood, the first priesthood? What was missing from that priesthood so that the order of Melchizedek, the current priesthood, had to come into effect? I was asking myself, what was missing? And what did the Melchizedek priesthood bring? And when you think about it, when it talks about that the person's conscience couldn't be made complete, or the word perfect, we need, and still do, we needed the Ruach. We needed the Ruach to be able to, because the scripture says that one of the purposes of the Ruach is to govern the soul, to walk upright before Yahuwah. So the first priesthood was demonstrating what was going to take place with the second priesthood. So it was never intended for the first priesthood to be an eternal priesthood, a permanent one, the Levitical priesthood. It was a demonstration a dry rehearsal, if you will, of what was coming through our Messiah. So that's why him coming has helped us to be able to walk upright before Yahuwah, to have good morals, good standards, because the Ruach leads us into all truth. It helps us to abide by the laws, by Torah. So I wanted to highlight that difference between the two. Thank you.
Yeah, Minister, you didn't let them step on this one, but you let them step on the future
What?
one.
Nobody's going to remember. It's okay.
That is absolutely, that's an excellent point, Minister. The difference is that the Ruach leads us into truth. Without the Ruach, you will not understand Torah. You won't get to that point. You won't get to it. Not to the fullness of Torah. So that's a great point. That's a great point.
Oh, not only will you not be able to fully understand it, because remember it says the law is spirit, Torah is spirit, but you won't be able to fully walk it out either. Two things you won't be able to do. So how can you serve Yahuwah, who is also spirit? So you need the Ruach to be able to serve him, to be complete, to be perfect. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Brother Andrew.
That's excellent. Yes, ma'am. That is true. Now, you remember this statement when we go into that next lesson.
I won't. I might not. I'll try.
I know. I'm not. I can't guarantee that myself. So, all right. Anybody else? All right. So we see now that what Paul is expressing here is that he's not talking about a covenant being destroyed or removed or ended, but he's literally speaking of the priesthood details that he said was replaced by patiently reading through chapter 8, that we discovered that he's really talking about the priesthood, and that now he goes into the details of this priesthood. So you know that he's really not talking about a covenant or the covenant. Okay? I want us to keep in mind. We can't forget what we've read already. All right. Sister Billy, you mind reading verses 11 through 14? Now, we read here, with the transferring of the high priest role to Yahusha, his blood purchased our conscience, which the service of the Levitical high priest could not do. Please read for me, Sister Billy.
Okay. Of the Mashiach being come and high priest of good things to come, by a greater and more perfect tabernacle, not made with hands, that is to say, not of this building, neither by the blood of goats and calves, but by his own blood he entered in once into the holy place, having obtained eternal redemption for us. For if the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of an heifer, sprinkling the unclean, sanctifieth to the purifying of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Mashiach, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without a spot to Yahuwah, purge your conscience from dead works to serve the living Yahuwah.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Sister Billy. So, a greater and more perfect tabernacle made without hands. And I thank the ministers, Minister White, Minister Ronnie, for this, because they get you to think, they get you to think this way. If there is a tabernacle in heaven, in the Shamayim, then there is a law to manage it. That's common sense. I've never thought to look at this until the ministers posed that question to me one day. We don't have a tabernacle. I don't give a care if it's tabernacle for Buddha to Satan himself. They all have rules. You can't just go up there and do whatever you want,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? So if that's the case, we have to understand that that law is still present. And now, think about the compare and contrast we've been getting in this chapter. The high priest here, the Levitical priesthood did this here. But now we have a high priest that has done the same thing, but with his blood, which is far better than the bloods of goats and calves. The same thing. And he went into the Holy of Holies once, into the holy place, having obtained eternal redemption for his people. He did the same thing that the priests did here on earth. So to say that it's thrown out doesn't make sense when he's following the very Torah in the Shamaim as well. He's doing the same things in under his order, under the Melchizedek order, that the priesthood had to do by example here, right? We have to think this stuff through, people. So far, all that we've talked about throughout this whole series is proven over and over again. It makes no sense to say that we have replaced or removed the covenant and that there's something new, when it's based upon the very same things that the very covenant has always been done. And we just spoke on in the previous slide that the tablets of the covenant are the Ten Commandments, and the church will tell you right now that the Ten Commandments are valid. So you're telling me you could take the tablets of the covenant and apply them to anything you want? Can you do that to any man's contract? If that's the case, I'm ready to do something with this mortgage. Who's not with me on that?
I'm with you.
Student loans. I know somebody got student loans. I know I do. So
Yeah.
the point. So the point I want people to understand is, we think that Yah does not have commitment, contract, all these things. You better believe he does. You better not tell Yah something that you're going to do and don't do it. You don't play that.
Mm-hmm.
So just ask Samson. He had a Nazarite vow that he was supposed to keep. He screwed that up and paid the price. We make these commitments to Yah, and Yah has commitments to us and his people. The promises he gave to Abraham, even before the law was written for man. So we know that. He doesn't, those don't go, if he wasn't a committed, absolute father, then he could not stand or believe anything. Who wants a wishy-washy father? That same understanding goes for his Torah. It's eternal, and it's in the Shamaim as well, as we speak of right now, right here in these verses. All right, do we have any questions? Any questions or add?
No, but I thank you for clarifying that, Brother Andrew. Do you know that a lot of people connect this verse, Hebrews 9:11, to Romans 3:25?
Read it, Brother David. Read it.
Okay. Hold on, let me look it up. And it says in Romans 3:25, it says, "Whom Elohim set forth as the atonement through believing his blood, to demonstrate his righteousness, because his tolerance Elohim has passed over the sins that have taken place before." So a lot of what I have seen, that a lot of people would like to connect these two verses together, because they think that, by Yahushua sacrificing himself, that the law is done away with and is better and is covered by the oath, so the Torah is done away with. So I notice how sometimes there are TikTok that this guy connected the two of them, and he's saying that that's because you can sing now and say you're sorry, and your sins will be passed over. because Yahushua's blood. That's how they like to connect those two verses.
Mm.
Yeah, Brother David. What tickles me is that in Romans 3 as well, he clarifies that the law is not done away with in another verse, I believe. Isn't it Romans 3 where he says, for the doers of the law are just?
Romans 2:12.
That's 2:12.
Wow.
Then there's another verse in Romans 3 I'm thinking about as well.
Romans 3:8.
Say it, bro.
Do we then make void through the law? Yah forbid. We establish the law.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. That is it.
Mm-hmm.
So if we establish the law through our faith, then they can't use that verse. But we know that the church does piecemeal, big time. That's how they misunderstand everything anyway.
Mm-hmm.
What verse was that?
Romans 2:12.
Romans 3 and 8.
Oh, sorry.
Romans 2:12. No, that's all right. And I believe Romans 3 and 8.
Okay, which verse was it? 2:12 or 3 and 8?
Both. Both points to Paul saying that the law or the Torah is still relevant and required. Because the doers of Torah are righteous or just in the eyes of God, and our faith establishes the Torah in our lives.
Y'all trying to find the verses?
No, they just were taking notes. All right. Anybody else? Any questions?
I'd like to show a contrast where Paul has written, the ashes of a heifer, sprinkling the unclean, sanctifieth to the purifying of the flesh. So that means that the rituals that we were going through, we were enacting in the Levitical priesthood, those things. And then he says, how much more shall the blood of Mashiach, when it's sprinkled through the eternal Ruach, because he offered himself to Yahuwah, right? How much shall it purge your consciousness from dead works? So notice it says that the blood of the bulls and goats and the ashes of a heifer, sprinkling unclean, sanctifies the flesh. But what Yahushua has done will sanctify the spirit, the moral consciousness of the individual. It will purge it from dead works. What dead works? Fornication, murder, theft, adultery, homosexuality, lust. All of those things are dead works that are generated from an erroneous mindset. So Yahusha, that Ruach, the sprinkling of that Ruach is going to purge our minds. Be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. It's going to change our mindset so that we can serve the living Yahuwah. So that's another reason why we have shifted from the Levitical order to the Melchizedek order. Thank you, Brother Andrew.
Well, no, thank you, man. So that's an excellent point. That's right. And dead works literally mean sin resulting in death as well,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Because these works do result in death.
Mm-hmm.
But if the purge you from the dead works, then there must be works that are unto life. So works are required. So when I hear people say salvation is free, there's no work, you can't earn your salvation, you're trying to use your works. The Bible clearly states that works are required. Even James speaks of it as well. So We got to read the whole Bible and not just little pieces and misunderstanding.
Before you share it, make sure you look at the whole bill, right?
Yep. 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 Yeah, nobody surveys a plot of land only in a corner and say the rest is good. How are you going to have a full understanding if you only look at a piece? All right. Anybody else? All right, let's continue. All right. This is a small verse, so I'll go ahead and read this. Hebrews 9, verse 15. And for this cause, then, since his blood purges our conscience, right, of the dead works. Now it says this part. And for this cause, he is the mediator of the New Testament. We've already told, it's funny how they switch the words up because we have seen better and now new. We've seen new, better, now new again. When we know that the word new is really a renew of the covenant. We've already discussed that in previous parts of this series. As for this cause, he is the mediator of the renewed covenant, that by means of death is death, for the redemption of the transgression that were under the first covenant, or under the covenant, the original covenant. Same covenant still. It's just these are the translations that you have to be careful with. They which are called might receive the promise of eternal inheritance. This verse points really to nothing new. Paul speaks to this in Romans, which we will discuss next, but I want us to discuss Paul's understanding and the highlighted words on the coming slide. All right. This points to a particular audience. This points to a particular purpose by the Messiah. All right. Before we continue, anybody want to add anything? Any questions before we move to really discuss this? All right. Let's continue. So, like I said, this verse really pointed to nothing new. Excuse me. Paul spoke of this in Romans 11, 25 through 26. For I would not, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own conceit. And blindness in part is happening to Yashar, Israel, and to the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. Now listen to this pause, and then say this. And so all Yashar shall be saved, as it is written, it shall come out of Zion, the deliverer, and shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob. Sister Lily, you asked me a question earlier today. I'm going to give you a verse that to help you answer that question. We're going to come up on in the next slide or two.
Awesome.
So part of Yasharel is blind until the fullness, fully brought in, of the Gentiles is complete. And then it says, and so once the Gentiles have been brought in, all of Yasharel is complete. So this group of Gentiles that Paul is talking to cannot be non-Yasharel. They cannot be somebody who's not Israel. Now the church would twist this, and we can define Gentiles through the Paul's letters easily in our other series where we do a deep dive into Paul's letters. You can find that on our website as well, where we prove that Gentile was speaking to foreign-born Israelites, Yasharel. That's why Paul then says all Yasharel will be saved. He didn't say Yasharel and the foreigners, because if Gentiles really meant that, he would have said that. Because you see the word foreigner and strangers used in Paul and Peter's writing. So Paul is defining the word Gentile here. So he's not referencing things that are new. He's referencing things that have already been discussed and proven. Why? Because transgressions is the key. of to understand what Paul was saying in 9:15. We're going to talk about that in the coming slide.
Brother Andrew,
Yes, sir.
we're assuming that Apostle Paul was a really smart man, right? And that he knew his geography as well.
Mm-hmm.
He knew he could distinguish what Spaniards look like, what Romans look like, what Egyptians look like, what Turkish look like, what Israel look like. So he knew, just like if he were alive today, he will know that what makes an Egyptian an Egyptian. The certain characteristics, right? The certain picture, faces, noses, what makes a Spaniard a Spaniard. So he knew how to depreciate other nations. That's my point. He knew what he was saying here. Because what people said, oh, maybe they didn't explore the world, and maybe they were just talking about their community. I don't buy that, because this man was smart enough to know his geography and distinguish what a Yashar, a Gasolin look like, and what a Spaniard will look like.
Yep, I totally agree with you. And not only that, to help prove your point, ask the question this question. What is Paul teaching from? What is Paul quoting? That answers your question. Because after he says, until the fullness of Gentiles who come in, and so all Yasharel shall be saved, as it is written. Where is that at? And who's that audience? And who's it speaking to? If you go to the verse, you'll see that concept of Gentiles, which we've been lied to for centuries,
Exactly.
does not mean what it means. If you look up the original etymology of the word Gentile, it simply meant nations. Nations. But we have been lied to by the church so they can try to include themselves in it. And I'm not talking about those who are of Yasharel. I'm talking about those who are of other nations and take hold of something that is not theirs. The promises are not theirs.
They like the promises, but they don't like the curses of
No,
the
you
cherry
better
picking.
believe it. And then you want to say you are God's people, and then you get a little taste of the curse, and then you want to say you want to complain. But if you're going to act like you're somebody, you might get a taste of more than what you want.
Mm-hmm.
But people don't look at things like that. The curses do follow the people. All you got to do is see who lines up with the curses. That's a whole nother conversation. But the point is, Paul is quoting something here which will help us understand whose are the transgressors, the redemption of the transgression. So we know that he's not talking of anything old because he's quoting something here. All right? Any questions before we move on? Or add? All righty, let's continue. So, Paul is quoting Isaiah 59 and 20. Listen to this word, this verse. And the Redeemer shall come to Zion, not the world, and to them, and unto them that turn from transgression in Jacob, saith Yahuwah. Not the world, not to some foreign nation or quote unquote Gentile. And he says this, as for me, this is my covenant, and this is going to speak to what Minister White was speaking to about the Ruach, right? And this is my covenant with them, saith Yah. My Ruach that is upon thee. He's speaking to Isaiah. And my words which I have put in thy mouth shall not depart out of thy mouth, nor out of the mouth of thy seed, nor out of the mouth of thy seed, saith Yah, from henceforth and forever. Yahuwah's Ruach and word will not depart out of the seed of Jacob's mouth. He's not speaking to anybody else. And we're going to get to that verse, Sister Lily. I haven't forgotten. We're going to get to it. For those who turn from transgression, which is breaking of Torah, we're going to clarify that definition soon. So the requirement of the covenant is not new. It's obedience to Torah. It's been around for the longest. How are you going to sit here and tell me this is new? When it was prophesied, the correction, the reformation, the returning to the way was prophesied hundreds and hundreds of years ago, based upon the same Torah that was originally provided to the people of Yashar, to Jacob's people, to Jacob. So we have to understand and read according to what Paul is teaching from as well, so we can get past some of these twists and turns the English translators put in. All right? Any questions? Any confusion? Everybody good?
Good, thank you.
All right. All right. So again, 9:15 does point to a verse. All right. Ezekiel 36:23-27. Sister Lily, are you able to read now?
Yes, okay.
Please read Ezekiel.
And I will sanctify my great name, which was profaned among the heathen, which ye have profaned in the midst of them, that in the heathen shall know that I am Yahuwah, says Adonai Yahuwah. When I shall be sanctified in you before their eyes, for I will take you from among the heathen and gather you out of all countries, and I will bring you into your own land. Then will I sprinkle clean water upon you, and ye shall be clean. From all the filthiness and from all your idols will I cleanse you. A new heart also will I give you, and a new spirit will I put within you. And I will take away the stony heart out of your flesh, and I will give you an heart of and I will give you an heart of flesh, and I will put my spirit within you, and cause you to walk in my statutes, and ye shall keep my judgments and do them.
Thank you, Sister Lily. You know, I thought we were going to get to that particular verse, but we might not get to it tonight. So I have to take that back. I'm sorry, Sister Lily. I thought we were getting to it. But we don't. If not, we'll talk about it. We'll talk about it. So, as Minister White has already told us, the Ruach causes disobedience to his Torah. And this agrees with Isaiah, what we just covered. So again, the keeping of the judgments, the keeping of the statutes, the obedience to Torah by the Ruach guidance, by the Holy Spirit's guidance, the Ruach HaKodesh, isn't new at all, because it's built upon the same things. The difference is now we have the Ruach HaKodesh, just like Minister White was saying.
Praise Yahuwah.
That guides us into all truth. So this is not new. Paul has been teaching from the old, as the church says. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Anybody have any questions or comments?
I'd like to make another comment, please.
Yes, ma'am.
On this scripture that you have on the screen, I'm just going in the middle of it, where it says, a new heart also will I give you, and a new spirit, or a renewed, new spirit will I put within you. The listeners should ask themselves, why do you need a new one? Or why do you need to renew the one that you have? What happened to it? This highlights again the importance of the order of Melchizedek, right? So Yahushua came so that our Ruach can be renewed or renewed. So what happened? Genesis chapter 3 happened. When we were evicted from the garden. and sent away from the presence of Yahuwah. Nothing can sustain itself outside of the presence of Yahuwah. So death took place. Our Ruach was damaged or dead, and we need to be revived so that we can live moral lifestyles in His presence, so we can minister to Him. That's what happened to us. That's why this Melchizedek order is important. Thank you, Brother Andrew.
No, you're welcome, Minister. You're so right. You're so right. And we are not taught in the church about this at all. And not at all. Anybody else? Any more comments? Okay, let's continue. So let's define these words so we can have a better understanding that what we're really dealing with is one audience. The word transgression is parabasis, and it means transgression of the Mosaic law. Thus, the redemption is for those who transgressed Torah of the covenant. It wasn't for everybody. It hasn't been for everybody. Not the redemption that Mashiach brought. All right? And if you look up the word transgress in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, it literally says to violate a command or law. And then it says sin right at the end of it. You can't. If the Merriam-Webster dictionary, which is probably the primary dictionary that English language users in the United States use, that dictionary has been around all my life, and you find it in every school. That's how it defines the word transgress. So think about it. Why redeem, which is a restore, right, to bring back a people who broke a law that is being thrown away? Why be so specific? The argument the church makes does not make sense when you read this verse here. And now that you know what the word transgression means, you know it doesn't make sense. If the redemption is for those who transgress Torah, then the new quote-unquote covenant is not new, but a renewing of the original, because it's based on the same Torah of the first. Why redeem someone that disobeyed something that already existed when you're starting something new? It doesn't make sense. And when you think of the promises, the eternal inheritance, all these things were promised to Yashar, and Paul spoke on that in Romans 9, chapter 9, 3 through 5, where he speaks of his people of the flesh, where they were given the law and the promises and so on. Paul didn't say to the world. He said to Yashar, his kinsman, after the flesh. All right? Now, the word first does not mean as in something that's different. It means there's a sequence to things. That's all. The definition is very long. If you go into Thayer's Greek, you have to really read through it to find it. But it's really talking about something that was given firsthand and something that's restored. So that's what first means. But it does not mean that there's something that new comes after it. It's just saying that this was what was first given. And that's all it means. But we assume that because there's something that's afterwards, that the first is the old. But it's like renewing wedding vows, right? Just because I renew my wedding vows, does that mean my marriage is new? No. It's the same contract. It's the same contract. All right. Any questions? I hope we understand so far that in Hebrews 9, nothing has pointed to anything that supports throwing the law out as the law of no more. All right. Now, by means of Yahushua's death, the contract or covenant was executed. And this is a very important concept that the church does not, and I hope we could get through it before the hour's up, but this is a concept the church doesn't think about. And I know the ministers and I have talked about this word before. But verses 16 through 17, for where a testament is, there must be also of necessity be the death of the testator. For testament is of force after men are dead. Otherwise, it is of no strength at all while the testator liveth. A testator is a person who creates a will, a testament, or covenant, and has the legal right to name the beneficiary. All right, Yahusha is the creator of this covenant. And now think about it. For he is the word of Yah, right? The Torah made flesh, the word made flesh, the way, the truth, and the life. The very thing the covenant is based on. And when he died, the testator, right, when his death came, this covenant was brought in force. So that means it can't be for everybody, this covenant. Because only the testator can claim who this covenant belongs, and he made it clear. The beneficiaries of the covenant, you can find it in the Gospels. Matthew 1:21, he was born to save the sins of his people. Matthew 10 and 6, I send you to the lost sheep only of Yashar. Matthew 15:24, he tells the woman at the well, I only come for the lost of Yashar. And John 18 and 20, where he says, I spoke openly to the world. I only spoke wherever the Jewish or the Yahudim resided. He didn't come for anybody else. The beneficiaries are his people. He is the testator. And when he died for our sins, the covenant, the contract was executed. That inheritance that I can gain through that contract was made possible now. So just like Paul said earlier in the book of Hebrews, there was a necessity for him to die, to go and do these things for us, these services. There's a necessity for him to be our high priest because he has things to do for us. Does that make sense? That this word, how important this word is, and how looking at its definition helps you understand that this is specific to one people, and this covenant was spoken on beforehand. It's nothing new. It's old and established. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Is there anybody that would like to add anything or have any questions? All right. We're going to call it quits here. This is about an hour, so I don't want to go any more to it. We might get into some more conversation, draw it out. So if there's no more questions, we're going to call it a night or any ad. All right. All right. Well, we thank you all for joining the House of Shiloh Ministries. I hope that the way we went through chapter 9 so far has opened your understanding, and that as we talk to you about this, the importance of when you read these letters of Paul, you do not forget what you've read. Sometimes you might have to go back, reread again, and then continue. But you cannot read in part these letters or you will miss the true meaning and the understanding that Paul is trying to express. All right? So please join us next week as we continue in part, 16, as we finish up Paul's chapter 9 in Paul's letter of the book of Hebrews. Shalom, everyone, and we thank you.
Shalom, everyone. Have a Barak night.